Okay, let's try this again. This is the VFX. I was gonna call it the VFX breakdown, but there's too many shots to be a breakdown, and also that's kind of what the whole Patreon's been for the past 2 years anyways, is a breakdown for this episode. So instead, it's just gonna be a VFX commentary where I get to pause it as much as I want, which is probably gonna be quite a bit. Because yeah, the episode's out. If you haven't seen it, you can go do that, or watch this first, and it can be like a really weird long trailer. This is the first opening shot. It's like 40 seconds long, and it kind of is a good little microcosm, love microcosms, of my workflow lately, where I'm just trying to get rid of that thing I always say of like that modeled feeling. Like I can see this is extruded and inset and kind of all of that. You know, just the thing when you extrude stuff and then you cube project a texture on it, you kind of try to align things to make it work, but like it just kind of feels like it's a texture on low res geometry. So that's kind of what I'm trying to push past as much as I can. And there's bits of this that kind of work. This area over here, I like quite a bit. This stuff right here feels like it has this kind of unifying, grungy patina to it. It feels like it could all have been weathered under the same elements, and that's kind of just because it's all dark. But as opposed to this area here, where I'm still kind of going hard on it, but it's like this electrical box just kind of feels like it's been stuck there. These cables, I don't know if I buy them. These tiles feel like they're just kind of like floating on top of a texture. And so trying to get more into this zone has been my goal. One of the big things that helped with this was just these little tiny micro details. This is just a scan I got of like pine needles in a gutter, and it's all just the same scan kind of over and over, and I stick it up so it's just intersecting in between the wall and the floor, and it helps a lot. I want to release this as an asset, but first I need to go around and just, I don't know, scan more of them, I guess, like with different garbage or leaves or whatever. And this is using a lot of assets I've made in the past and have already shared here, like the window assets or the concrete assets and all the different tutorials about blinking lights and kind of things like that. Let's see. So we get to this shot right here. These are my friends on a green screen. They just came over and I was like, hey, can you hold this dumbbell wrapped in a blanket and pretend it's your baby? And it works okay. I probably could have designed the digital environment around them to kind of, they're obviously just a green screen, you know, on a card in the scene, and I could have maybe incorporated them better, but I think it looks okay. It's hard because it's such a little nested composition there that it feels almost like it's a TV inside of a larger scene, but I think that's okay. Usually what I'll do is I'll try to model, I'll block the whole thing in kind of low res, low poly, and then I'll just keep adding more geometry. And then eventually, once I feel like I've kind of done, it's so easy to just go to another scene that's kind of similar and copy and paste in a bunch of assets you've already made, but I try to force myself to model something new and original for kind of every shot. Like for this shot right here, I needed this floating robot, so I went to this shot here. Yeah, I copied out of here, and then since there was some good rooftop stuff in there, I just selected that and pasted it in. But because a lot of these objects have like dripping materials on them, if you watch the 4K version, you can actually see some of those drips going down some of these assets in the background. But yeah, I asked you guys things you specifically wanted me to break down, and the ones you guys listed the most were actually kind of interesting because they're ones that are pretty basic, actually. Like technically it's using like old school kind of techniques and tools just kind of combined on kind of a base level, but they both work really well in the context of the scene. And the first example of that is kind of the explosion here. This is not a good explosion, but it works pretty well in the context of the scene. We've got a lot of anticipation moving up for it. You see a couple frames that things are happening really fast, and then we kind of cut to black before your brain can process. That isn't actually a great explosion, but yeah, we can break it down. It's effectively just a particle emitter blasting out all of these different shards, a light flashing, and a Boolean operation that suddenly eats away at the house. And when you actually frame by frame it, again, it doesn't totally work. And I even have this like hypersaturated yellow, which is a color correction. Let's go into the file. So this is the project file of just the house and the robot kind of attack. And then I link that into my other scene. It's just, that's kind of my most base level of organization these days, is any major kind of element like this. I hate having to like work on complicated things where there's also an entire cityscape around it. So I'll just do it separately, link it in, and then I'll use the, let's see, what's a good example here? The edit link library that just lets you click and it'll automatically open up the new blend project that has whatever linked collection that's in. You can work on it, and then that also lets you hop back into the original file. We'll get into it in a second. But yeah, here's the robot, and the muzzle flash is literally just a picture of a muzzle flash. I'm putting the muzzle flash into an emission shader, and I'm using an add shader to also add that to whatever values happen to be behind the object, which effectively gives you like an add blend mode in After Effects or, Photoshop or whatever. But yeah, as we go through, I just animate the strength to 5, and then to turn it into a bullet, I'm literally just scaling the muzzle flash out to make it look like it's like a laser or something. Then I've got my light that turns on inside of here. Then I have, I think, another light flashing down there, and I do the Boolean thing to kind of eat away at the house. And for the Booleans, if you have the Bool tool enabled, which I think just comes with Blender by default, you can have 2 different cubes, and you can use one to eat away from the other. So let's subdivide this one a few times, maybe turn up the fractal noise a little bit to make it squiggly. If we select this, then shift-click on this and hit Control negative, this creates a negative Boolean we can use to eat away from this one. So what I would do is I would add a keyframe here, and then on the previous keyframe it'd be gone. Add another keyframe, so just on that frame, it disappears, and I put all my particles on top of that to make it look as if, it exploded. In fact, I just have one little particle system going on being linked in from another project, and I'm just using it a bunch. In fact, these guys here aren't even on the right axis. I kind of rotated them because I wanted this starting shape, but they fall in the wrong direction, which is part of why I cut so quick. But yeah, let's go into that linked library. We can just click right here. You can see I've got the underlying splinters, which are the actual particles that come out, which are just cubes that I've kind of offset a little bit. They don't even have a material. They're just like a flat gray. I don't know why I didn't give them a material. And then yeah, we've got the particle system right here, and that's what's being linked in. Particle systems, just to go over it really fast, let's say you've got your face right here, and we can turn on the normals. Normals are just an imaginary line perpendicular to the face of the object. So this right here is this face is normal. And when we set up a particle system right here, let's click new, we get to decide how many particles, let's say 500, and let's have them all come out on exactly this frame. So I'm just gonna make them all start coming out on that frame and be done on that frame. And when we hit play, boop, there we go. And if we go down under velocity, you can see we've got normal right here, so we can turn that up, and that affects how fast they come out along the normal. We can randomize it a little bit. Let's check rotation. We'll randomize that, make it dynamic, which will make things kind of, more interesting. And we, instead of rendering as a halo here, let's render it as a collection. Oh, my face is in the way, but yeah, we'll just have an instance as the splinters here. And then ideally, oh, and we can turn up the scale and maybe the randomness and maybe turn down the overall size a little bit, or number. But yeah, that's what we do. I would actually probably more do something like 40 of these big ones, and then on top of that I would do another particle system that's basically the same thing, but just with maybe 600 very little ones kind of instead, wherever the scale is at. Yeah, and you combine those two and you get a nice kind of mix of everything. Instead of doing things right, sometimes you can just do a lot of them, and it takes the brain a second to figure out this isn't good, because it's just too busy being overwhelmed by wow, that's a lot of shards, this must be a big explosion. We'll talk more about that in a minute, I think. You can barely see it in the thing, but I do also have some pre-keyed explosion footage on this plane too. And this is from Detonation Films. My friend Bob Forward has been just recording explosions and uploading them to the internet. Some of them are free, some are packs you can download, but he's been doing that since 2004 or something, back from the mini DV days. He's great. So this is one of his explosions. Yeah, we've got the beach scene here, and this shot is also a pretty good microcosm from my current workflow. And I've used it up. I won't say microcosm anymore. But yeah, we're projecting footage from the camera onto some low-res geometry that kind of represents that shot, and that lets us kind of move around a little bit. And you can see I've also isolated Caitlin right here and put her on her own plane so that we can kind of put stuff behind her. If we want to add some haze or depth of field or something, she'll actually exist kind of within the scene in a way that works really good. One of the big reasons I bothered reprojecting this shot to begin with is because I wanted to start looking up higher than the original shot went. If we look at this footage and extrude it up, you can see this is the top of the shot right here, because I realized only after we filmed it that I wanted to start by seeing this roller coaster going by. And so to fill that space, I had to extend these beams right here. You can see they just kind of went off originally. And they integrated pretty well because there were actually kind of some beams there in real life. So the shadows here and kind of these corners really helped sell it. For this episode, basically my entire Resolve timeline was just straight raw Blender renders. Like, I did all of my compositing in the viewport here, which meant I got a little bit funky with kind of gradients and stuff where I was actually processing the footage on the shader level. And let me show you that right now. Here, I'm going to create an empty sphere right here. Let's go into our footage. This one is coming out of the footage into the emission shader, so that's controlling that. But let's actually have two versions of that. We'll have both of them going into this mix thing here, which means now they're both the same, but we can put one through like RGB curves that darkens it like that. Now we can kind of control between the two. And let's control what part is which with a gradient. And if this doesn't make sense, hopefully it will in a second. Right now it's generating a gradient, but it doesn't know where the gradient is or what it wants it to be doing, so I'm going to hit Control T to get my mapping nodes. And I'm going to use an object, and I can just eyedropper that empty we created right here. And now this controls the gradient. And let's change it from linear to a quadratic sphere. So now I've got this going on, and I can just plug the output of that gradient into the mix factor between these two. And if we look at the final, I now have a gradient that can kind of darken up wherever I put this, which is like really handy for like if I'm trying to sculpt things, or like if this hadn't already had a contact shadow right here underneath the beam, I could use this, kind of scale this up like this, and add in my own contact shadow to kind of imply certain integration. For example, I'm doing that in the background here with this footage layer. I've got this gradient that kind of lets me fade out the footage into the digital background. I've got my real rockery here, and then I've got my photo scanned rockery, and it doesn't actually line up, but because the gradient's soft enough, it kind of feels like it does. And so yeah, I was able to blend pretty seamlessly just into this background, all these background photo scans I've got. If you're curious about like the projecting the footage onto the geometry aspect, I've made a lot of tutorials about that. I'll make kind of a little list of relevant tutorials underneath. But yeah, if you're here on the Patreon, you've already probably heard me talk about that to death, so I'm gonna try to go fast. For isolating Caitlin, I kind of have three methods. For one or two shots in this episode, Zeke Faust actually just straight up brute force rotoed the character, which very thankful to him for that. But also sometimes I'll use some of these new auto kind of masking tools that are coming out with like machine learning. Resolve has some like quick masks, which I think are mostly used for color correction, but it turns out it gives you a reasonable, like if you actually look at it close, it's not great, but as long as you're putting it in front of something that kind of has the same values, like all that futz kind of just melts away. And the third way is trying to just luck out and use like a Luma or color key or something like that. And yeah, we'll get into that pretty quick too. This shot, again, very, very similar to the other one. They're in an actual location, but then trying to enhance it. Reflections or something I still haven't figured out. Like you can see right here, I kind of darkened up the water using the gradient method, but it's not, you can see there's not actually a reflection of anything up there. These posts were real, so we get that, but yeah, that's about it. The garbage is fake, which I thought you'd see more slipping, but let's look at the shot. So there's elegant and there's kind of inelegant ways to do this. I kind of did the inelegant way, but yeah, when I track the footage, I just got an abundance of tracking points. And then when we go back into the scene, you can see all of them just floating around, and I use proportional editing to kind of just sculpt my ground to intersect those points to the best of my ability. But that means I was able to just kind of like stick my garbage right here in the scene, and it all just kind of like played nice. I added a lot of these kind of overhangs and stuff to the on top of the footage. I wanted the whole scene to feel like you're kind of like hiding away. You're kind of outside of where everybody's having fun. We're kind of underneath the boardwalk, and it also just kind of made things feel, you know, a little bit cozy, I guess. But yeah, we got a ton of footage of them crawling over this stuff. You can see that there's so much diffusion here, and that's because it was just raining nonstop the entire day. Like if you look in the background, that's a lot of like just rain and muck. And so yeah, we were all just wet. The haze is one of the hardest parts of the compositing for doing like digital extensions, because that means you have to match the black levels. And if I'm trying to like replace, I'm trying to put a digital thing here, the haze from the sky still bleeding onto everything else is still there. It's hard to tell here because everything's in log, but when I'm trying to add my digital extension up here, I still have this sky bleed kind of glowing onto these posts here. So I had to do all of this kind of weird multiplication stuff. But yeah, this is the original shot. You can see we've got this kind of like old park museum of an old like logging factory going on. It's kind of cool. It was a good vibe for the day. Like I love the way water roughens up and diffuses like that when there's just like constant rain on it. It was yeah, we had a good vibe. even if it was very cold and uncomfortable. Oh, also for like these posts, these pilings, kind of being in front of this background city. I was just pulling a luma key right in the viewport. Yeah, I'm projecting the footage onto a plane, which is in approximately the right place in 3D space, and then I've got the footage going to a color ramp where I'm kind of like trying to control the mask here and using that to control the mix factor between an emission shader with the footage and a transparent shader. And so yeah, we just kind of get this floating bit that from the camera's perspective drops on top of everything. Anytime you see this background city, it's basically just the same render over and over and over. I liked having it back there. Kind of gave a lot of the shots this feeling of continuity, and also this good sci-fi orb. Oh yeah. These little seagulls are just seagulls when I'm going for walks. Sometimes I'll pass a seagull that doesn't give a shit that I'm there, and I'll be like, all right, I'm just going to record you close up for like a minute. And then I'm slowly gathering a collection that I want to turn into some sort of like sprite sheet or library that I could share with you guys. Here's another one. You know, they're just chilling. This guy's got sunlight on him. That's kind of weird. This shot is actually a completely different location on a completely different day. This is just a weird old condemned house that I have in Port Orchard, and when the tide is high, it's basically lapping up against the bottom here, but when it goes out, we've got this old kind of creek that goes right under the house, and I just always thought these tide flats were so interesting. So I just filmed a shot there once, pulled over on the side of the road, and these guys are actually just a luma key like I did with the pilings from a different shot from yeah, I think right here. And I stabilized the shot and I put them on a plane, and I think I literally just like distorted the geometry of the plane to try to flatten out the shoreline. And it doesn't work perfect, but like your brain's already accepted that there's little people there and they're like picking up cans, and so nobody's really looking at them really. It's like you're probably looking at the weird spaceport or like, you know, the motel or the sci-fi city or something like that. This scene, I added all of this stuff. I don't even know why. I think I thought I was going to be like adding a bunch of weird world building stuff up there, but instead I just kind of kept it raw. I did add that same city in the background, but yeah, this was a really cool location. We only had to trespass a little bit. This is obviously that same location we just saw, but flipped horizontally. But I think that kind of works for making it feel like they were passing through kind of the space and they're coming out the other side. This foreground bit is all digital. I'm doing the same thing with the pilings here to kind of like add in this Ferris pier in the back. The Ferris pier was fun. My other friend Zeke went on a vacation to Mexico and just filmed this like distant fairground thing. And I was like, can you send me that footage, your vacation footage? So I was able to stabilize that, drop it into the scene as like an emissive shader. Yeah, kind of going, and then I just project it on top of this other weird geometry here. And if you've seen my color workflow kind of video from very recently, you can see we can just turn on the exposure, get all these details back over here, and yeah, this shot has quite a bit of dynamic range. But yeah, I like that method of being able to get all those real blinking light textures kind of going in the background of the scene, and I think it feels really natural. I like this shot for kind of basically one reason, is I've always loved, you know, Tarkovsky's cinematography, and he always had this very elemental and like strong, weird compositions and stuff. He's always got water flowing or kind of, you know, things in water, or this famous shot from Ivan's Childhood, and I'm like, yeah, look, I've got some like strong silhouetted beams too, because I'm an idiot. This shot is fully digital, and I'm kind of tickled that like even people who I thought would know that obviously didn't actually know that. And most of it's because I just had this little barnacle asset. I scanned like a little cluster of barnacles once, and everywhere you could kind of see my other photo scans were a little bit too low poly. I just dug barnacles there, and yeah, just like hide every crime with barnacles. All the rocks are just kind of rocks from, you know, near the ocean where I live. The Sea Star is a scan released, CC0 by Museum. It's in the credits. I just use proportional editing to kind of like try to make it look a little bit more soft and alive and kind of make different variations. I'm also doing like a color randomization thing on the shader, but most of the weight is being carried by the water shader here. I love that we can just path trace like refraction and reflections and all of that and just get those layers actually there. Ideally for realism, the water should be murkier. I love to have my water nice and clean like the Caribbean. It's part of my little fantasy. But if I really want it to be realistic, like, yeah, we're gonna turn up the absorption and all of that and maybe make the color be nice and gross. Like, this is what Puget Sound looks like, but I don't want to do water like that. I am really happy. Like, I finally added that little iridescent, like oil sheen. And that's literally just the color output of a noise texture with like the saturation boosted being mixed it in with a couple other things. Oh, one thing I did that kind of worked pretty well is I have this ambient occlusion shader going on. And you can see just like when it gets close to geometry, it gives you a darker thing here. And I use that to power the roughness of the glass shader, basically, which means the water just like it implies a disturbance or something, and it also helps hide like having that hard seam where it goes straight from water to like pure mesh. It just kind of helped blend things. This is one of the very last shots that I finished. Effectively, I had to wait a month because we're getting the soundtrack ready for release also. So I was kind of sitting on my hands and I thought, okay, I'm just going to go back and I'm going to update little shots kind of as little treats to myself. And I'd made these little blowing plastic garbage assets that I released a couple weeks ago, where I just gathered lots of like little bits of plastic from the side of the freeway and recorded them on a green screen and stabilized everything and kind of turned it into a little sprite sheet. And yeah, just dropping these into the actual shot added little bits that like doing a full actual cloth sim would have been, kind of ridiculous. Everything beyond them, this was just another Luma key because the water was actually kind of a nice bright flat color, so I was able to just throttle that right in the shader too. You can see a little bit of the fringe right here around the edges, but here, because they had kind of a matching background behind them, they still have the fringe, we can't really see it. The water, I always like that patterned roughness kind of breaking up the water as it goes off into the distance. That's just a noise texture plugged into the roughness again, where I scale it to kind of be the right size, mixed with like a little other noise texture going into a bump map for these little microwaves. And also there's a little floating thing. I think that's just a mistake. Yeah. Hey, we got more seagulls. This shot, so I'm doing the same thing with that roughness, but I'm moving it so that kind of feels like it's gusts of wind moving across the water. And it works to a surprising degree. The thing that doesn't work are my little splashes here. It's just a little particle system like bouncing little orbs of water. And if you really look at it, it's like that's not what water looks like, but hopefully nobody does look at it. Also, most of these are Lux. Here's Tom resting his elbow in midair. I always meant to fix that. This shot was mostly made in color correction. You can see we've got our little Ferris wheel kind of going on again. In fact, let's open the shot. Yeah, this is closer to what it really looked like. Again, it was just a dreary day, but I always like it. We get it here in Seattle quite a bit, where like the sky is overcast, but for like 5 minutes, everything just becomes this weird, vibrant purple, and that's because like above the clouds, the world's craziest sunset is happening, and all we can see of it is like the result of that color kind of bleeding through. But yeah, some weird stuff here, doing the same thing with like, all the different pilings and stuff being projected in the appropriate places, and I'm also kind of extending some of these power poles to be like, extensions of the things in the original footage. But for this big spaceport thing right here, I needed it to match the colors of the hills so it would all kind of blend. And I did that by just creating a weird gradient right here. It's just a linear gradient going from left to right across the thing, and I would use the eyedropper tool to like eyedropper the color that I wanted it to be, and then that bit would just kind of blend in with that part of the hill. And on top of that, I mixed in part of the original footage texture, so we can like, so here's the original footage being projected from the camera, and here's just the straight gradient, and I was able to kind of dial in the look that I wanted. Oh, and I also had another gradient just kind of going horizontally to represent the clouds, and I'm using that to, again, mix in more of the original footage, as if once it gets high enough, it's kind of just blending into the sky from the original footage. In fact, which object is it using right here? Oh, just empty. All right, so we've got the empty, and if I move the empty, you can see we can control kind of like the cloud level right here. Ooh, that's kind of interesting. One thing I really like doing was changing things like that over the course of the shot, as if clouds are actually kind of like passing through. Things where it's really subtle, like maybe you start the shot like this, and then it's like a 15-second shot, and by the end it's like this, and so your brain at some point just has to recheck in and be like, oh, I didn't notice that was there before, and it kind of gives your brain something to do as you're watching the shot, I guess. But yes, then I made it very purple. These vending machines are, I think, one of the first assets I ever put up on the Patreon. They still look a little bit silly, but that's kind of fun. And I was gonna go harder on this. This was just a placeholder, but it's fine. I don't think anybody actually looked there anyways. This shot we did together is kind of a little video on the Patreon. It's just a little LED light in the actual footage. We literally just snagged this during an extra moment when Lux was like driving off to Jack in the Box to get some extra like ingredients to make taco burgers. Shots like this are hard because you're at a level, this is a big 4K render where you can just see everything. And it's always, you know, I'm trying to cheat a little bit with the depth of field, keep it from being too deep, so I only have to worry about like this one cross section that's in focus. But even still, it's this thing where it's like when I look at this object, I don't really believe I could touch it. And like this procedural, you know, wear and tear texture here, it's like, I don't know, but it works okay. This shot, I think also we did together on the Patreon. I like things like this because like all of these buildings are digitally added in the foreground, so I don't have to do any green screening or rotoscoping or anything. I can just track them in there. And I'm pretty happy with how well this CG blends into live action footage. And again, like I'm doing another digital extension behind them, but since they're just in front of the wall, I don't have to worry about it. I'm projecting this onto geometry, which means I don't even have to like mask anything. The same with this shot right here. We're kind of working on this one together, making this this platform and everything. But I went ahead and I added all this foreground stuff. It feels a little I don't know. No, I like it. It seems like it's trying a little bit hard, I guess. I don't know what that means. These signs are actually from Bremerton, near where I live. There's a vintage shop with this wacky font. My friend was doing a tattoo convention at the local fair, and she was kind of hiding out back, and there were all of the old, like, you know, elephant ear and churro booths and all of that. So I was like, can you take me some pictures of those I can use as textures? So this is like a real Puyallup Fair, like, Italian soda booth. It's just kind of sticking back there. I think the thing that kind of bugs me about this shot is like whenever something I don't feel like it's really being sold, like it kind of feels unrealistic, a lot of times I'll just add grunge on top of it, but sometimes instead of just adding grunge, you have to actually design things better. And I feel like I didn't really design things well here. I just kind of leaned really heavily into the grunge. But I am happy about what I did at the very last second. This is like one of those shots I did in the very last week before release. I had this shot, and then it cut to this, like, kind of abruptly to this shot of this skywriting plane kind of going across the sky. And the edit just didn't really gel, and so I ended up just extending this shot. The shot wasn't actually long enough to do that, and so I'm just kind of tilting off right before it ends, and this is kind of all the new digital stuff, and I think that worked a lot better. I like having it kind of incidentally seen through the roof here, and just like having the shot leave the actors halfway through means that the camera and the audience are kind of just like looking around. You're in this space, but like these people aren't the most important. I like the aesthetic of these animated bubbles like that. That feels really classic. If you search the Patreon for like complex neon signs or animated neon signs, you'll find a tutorial where I explain how to do that. It's actually pretty easy. Then we get to the Christmas parade. This is the robot from the crab battle thing. And if you look, I never rigged up his shoulder or his elbows. This is very much an Ian 6 years ago model where I wasn't really worried about that kind of stuff. But I did give him a giant nutcracker head to kind of distract the eye. The idea being that like they repurpose these robots. They're used for different things. Sometimes they're fighting crabs, and for Christmas, they'll put on the nutcracker head. I was going to do this whole thing, animatronic crabs and all of that, but instead I've just got these little guys doing this little like crab dance in the bottom. Yeah, they're silly. And then, yeah, we've got our guys up here. I'm happy how well that worked, considering, again, it was the end of a day of us, like, filming in January. Everybody's sopping wet. We're freezing. And now I'm like, hey, now can you act a scene for me? And everybody was a really good sport about it. They both Caitlin and Tom are like, Ian, we know you're going to, like, be doing CG on this for the next 6 months. So if you need to take, like, 60 seconds to get a better take, we're totally down for that. And I actually really appreciate that. Because it's true. I will be looking at the shot for probably days on end, kicking myself, being like, why couldn't I just have had them scoot over, 6 inches and, like, try it this way or something and save myself a day of work? So no, yeah, they're good friends. Old Christmas Man. So this is, just footage of my friend Scott Curvin pretending he's like an old Christmas man. Yeah, here we go. So it's set up as the texture for this spotlight right here, just using the UV coordinates and going, yeah, kind of straight in there. You can control the offset and the scaling of everything. I think I can even like just scale straight on the on the spotlight too. What I liked was being able to skew his face a little bit. Like I kind of stretched everything out just because I thought it looked pretty funny. Yeah. And this surface here is just a translucent shader mixed in with like a glossy shader. And I'm projecting my footage down onto this shape right here, which you'll notice that it's a pretty crazy shape. And that's because I didn't want there to be a clear line between the CG and the real. So anything I can do to kind of mix things up. In fact, underneath here, this looks like a straight line, but I've got my, photo scanned beach thing that's jaggeding that all up. It is a little bit lighter and like less red than this, and so one thing I'll do a lot is I'll create a plane to cast a shadow. Under the object properties, I'll turn off camera visibility so it's only casting the shadow, and then I'll give it a transparent shader, and whatever we do to the transparent shader also happens to the shadow. So if I make it, like really purple, you can see it's being tinted purple. So I could just sample some of this red right here, turn up the value, raise it up a tad to kind of soften it out, and yeah, that's a way of kind of helping make the photo scan blend into the footage. I try to make the footage blend into the photo scan. Maybe I'll make it darker but less saturated. It's the nice thing about night scenes is if you need to, you can kind of just darken everything up. And one, that helps the composition sometimes because it makes you focus on where you want people's eyes to be. And two, it just means, you can hide your crimes. Here's Scott Curvin again. A lot of these boats are just kit bashed out of like pieces I scanned at the Agriculture Museum a while back. Just different tractor parts put together, and from a distance, it's like, sure, that's a boat. And next up is the fireworks shot, which I think is the second most asked for kind of breakdown. Which again, it's just really basic particle systems kind of used, all kind of stacked in parallel. Let's open the file. Hide all these unnecessary layers. These are all just pictures of lens flares that I kind of drop on there. But yeah, here we go. So I've got this main central particle system, which is just, random particles coming out of probably a cube or something. And I've just got two of them. or I guess three, but like there's mostly a central one and then another one that's like dispersing them a little bit. And then as it goes up, I've got these cylinders, which are just projecting the particles out along their normals in every direction like that. And I have all of those triggering on the frame when the central thing goes by. So like right here, this goes by on frame 10. And so, yeah, if we wanted to add a new one, we would just like, let's see. This one has a normal velocity of, where is that? Yeah, of 14. This one has one of 11. So if we kind of just split the difference here and put one right in the middle that's like 12 and time it for when this goes by right here on frame 14. They all come out on that frame. Bake it. And yeah, now we've added a new little ring there. And the little Christmas ornaments that appear are just kind of the same thing. I've got these little spheres that just appear for like a frame and blast out their little particle system. I think the reason that this works as well as it does is because, again, it's kind of putting the viewer in the... It's because it's kind of evolving over time. You're like, oh, that's kind of an interesting firework thing. And then at some point it clicks in your brain like, oh, it's a Christmas tree. And I think just that moment of like, oh, it's a Christmas tree kind of like captures the feeling fairly well. Yeah, on top of that, I do have like all of these lens flares going on, which I wanted a lens flare that matched my actual lens, and so I just shone my my phone flashlight into the lens and took a picture of the flare. Unfortunately, you can see there's this little square here, and that's just where the flashlight is illuminating the edge of my like phone case, which yeah is there in basically every shot. I don't know why I've never painted it out. I was like, oh, it adds some interesting texture, but it's like, nah, that's just a mistake. I was going to add an extension here. Like, it's kind of implied there should be stuff there. And I was going to try to do all this relighting for, like, when the fireworks were going. And I just kind of realized, you know what? I could do that, but it's not lacking for not having it. So I didn't. This shot right here, I'm really happy with. This is one of the later shots I did. And this robot right here is animated entirely with physics. He's a rigid body system using rigid body constraints. And it took me the longest time to get around to actually learning rigid body constraints. But it's so handy for like just doing those little wiggles and things that like you can kind of hand animate, but the way everything affects everything else, like I'm used to kind of secondary motion where you animate the main thing and then the secondary things can kind of be wiggling on top of that in a way that makes sense. But because of inertia and all of that, those little things are also transferring their energy back into the main thing, and that's a very hard thing to kind of animate and have feel natural. But with rigid bodies, you just get that all for free. So yeah, I've got a tutorial breaking all of that down. I was pretty happy with that. Most of this stuff here, I kind of blocked it in with the rigid bodies, then just kind of kit bashed replaced it with photo scans I got at the Tractor Museum. Or again, I'm always stopping if I see interesting construction equipment, and I'll scan little kind of gizmos there. You can kind of see it. Like each one of these is just a component from a thing, and I just kind of tried to make it feel natural. On top of it, I have a little bit of a procedural grime, kind of trying to tie everything together. I'm gonna make a video about that too. Somebody asked how to make textures kind of play nice together, and there's a few tricks there. The background, yeah, this is all just ground scans and garbage scans. I'll walk around like under overpasses and stuff and just kind of scan weird stuff that's flown off of trucks. And that's a lot of this. I think the background here are literally just pictures. In fact, I think that's the edge of a picture. This shot, I actually tried to redo a lot. This bit where it flies off the little berm here, whoa, I always thought felt a little floaty. I think I could have had it kind of like hit a little bit harder. But after opening it up and trying to animate it better and kind of failing like 5 times, I just eventually stopped. This shot's kind of the same thing. This stuff here is a photo scan that I think I bought, which is somebody just using drone footage of cars in a graveyard, a car graveyard, auto parts, something. Junkyard is the word. And yeah, the rest of this is scans that I mostly got. Again, more tractor museum stuff. There was a bus or an RV that caught on fire that was on my street for a long time. And so I scanned that, and you can see that's all of these skinny bits here. And I re-rendered this kind of at the last second because I wanted to add all those little like billowing plastic assets, which I think adds some really good. I just like the way, I believe that right there. Like that feels like a real little thing, and the translucency does quite a bit too. Started playing a lot more with translucency and reflections in this episode. We'll be getting into that more later. This ship landing animation is the exact same one that we see later because it was kind of hard to animate. I just linked it in and was able to animate that entire linked collection also independently. So I added this kind of like, it's curving in, but that's literally just like an animation on top of the entire linked collection. These are little Rococo people. I got more audacious with my digital doubles in this episode, and nobody's been bothered by them that I've seen so far, which is good. I think that's a threshold. The ones in Salad Mug were always a little bit, they didn't really hold up. We got this shot. We made this one here on Patreon mostly. I liked this shot, like having the bright blue here. One of the things that can really help realism and composition is to have a bit that's just too bright really for the exposure of the rest of the shot. Like if a sunbeam's coming in, our predisposition is to like try to make it fit within the dynamic range of the rest of the image, not have it be blown out. But a lot of times there's some part of every image that's just too bright, and so having this bit where it just feels like it's kind of blown out, I didn't really like this shot until that happened, and now it's like one of my favorite shots. Not much to say about this one. These are a lot of these grounds here are from the Pete episode, where again I took drone footage we got while we were filming the Pete episode, and I extracted an image sequence and ran it through reality capture, and was able to get like basically photo scans of the environment. So that's what this is, along with this little sagebrush asset that I used over and over. This shot, I always thought I was going to redo. I did this shot like a year and a half ago. It was one of the first shots I did, and I always figured I'd have all these new assets and kind of techniques, but looking back at it towards the end, I was still pretty happy with it. There's things I would fix, like there's this facade right here that obviously doesn't have anything behind it. I could have just put like a rectangle here, and that would have implied it had any sort of depth. But yeah, this is one of those kind of kitchen sink shots where you throw every technique at it, and this is the type of shot that people tend to ask the most about or want a tutorial for, like how do you do a big city shot? And honestly, it's not. There's kind of two experiences you have when you first see a big city shot. The first one is like you can just take one building and copy and paste it a million times, and the initial split-second reaction somebody's brain has is like, wow, that's a big city, look at all that stuff. And then in the subsequent seconds they realize there is nothing to actually look at here. This is just facades forever. And so I'm always kind of trying to figure out that balance of like, how do you get that first impression of, wow, that's a big city, but then kind of guide people's eyes so it feels like there's actually kind of stuff to look at. I like the fact that all of this has to do, like film is a time-based medium. I get to control how long people are able to look at stuff. And a lot of times as I'm working on the shot, I'm kind of anticipating like, first they're looking here, and then like this building obscures that, so I kind of like give the next thing to look at. And the end result as you're watching it is like, oh, I'm looking everywhere and seeing stuff. And it's like, there's 4 things to look at. But yeah, this whole thing is the sprawl asset I released a while ago, where yeah, it's just these 5 buildings. And the interesting thing is our brains are really, really good at identifying repeating patterns and textures until suddenly they're not. And then it just kind of looks like infinite chaos. And so my goal was to try to like make it so I could copy and paste these without triggering that pattern recognition kind of part of the brain. And so when we do this, the interior lights are always different. Different lights are always off and on. I have a lot of the shaders, like the tarp shaders here, where sometimes they'll mix in with like a transparent shader instead. Yeah, here, this tarp's here, but like it isn't on these other ones. So I was trying to do stuff like that. So the overall shape and the patterns didn't feel too repeated. And then again, you imagine any of these rotated on any of like the 90 degrees and you've got a lot of variety. Undo that, and if we turn on big city, yeah, this is kind of what we got. And again, you probably felt it, that thing when it first clicks in, you're like, whoa, that's a whole city. But there's nothing to look at. It's just the impression of a big city. And you get that nice parallax. You can kind of get the feeling of rooftops and little streets. The streets are just, here, if I turn off the geometry nodes here, you can see I just have an underlying texture with like bright random bits glowing up on it. And then those shine up through the buildings and kind of make it feel like city streets. And then, so my goal is once I have this in a shot, I'll go through and I'll start adding in actual signage and billboards and kind of world-specific type things. But again, I'm really proud of this asset. Released it, I think, a year ago. It just manifests on whatever, mesh you have. So we could be like, here, let's pull this up, and you've suddenly made like a hill. And because the underlying buildings are really like, there's only 5 really low poly models, you can have like a bunch of them. This is like a couple square kilometers, and like my computer doesn't even really notice. It's great. But since one of my goals is to actually give people something to look at, I try not to, like, it'd be really easy to just open up another city shot I'd made and copy and paste in all of those old assets. So again, I usually try to like hold off on that, model a couple shot specific things, but yeah, all of these assets like this, this shrine here and all of these little tents and everything are mostly all just copied in from this shot. This shot here works okay. Again, it's a lot of the scanned construction equipment and all of that. I didn't do the work designing anything. Like, this is just greebles on the inside of a box. Greebles being, just the little techno filler bits. And I like to just sit down and do even a quick sketch to be like, how would this actually work in like real life? Like, I thought, okay, this is a modular thing. They have a big kind of backhoe shovel here, but the actual mechanism of like how that would work, like they go, okay, this is the backhoe compartment, and maybe this is like a door that opens and it can scoop, but I didn't actually figure out how that works. Next shot is another example of kind of that trying to guide the eye type thing. What I wanted to do was very deliberately capture that experience of looking out an airplane window as you're coming in for landing at an airport. And I'm pretty proud because I think it kind of does that. But yeah, this thing of like, you see the neon sign here passing out of the way, and just as you kind of get the sense of like, this feels like a glowing city street, but when you actually look at the scale of like this building, like, what is that? It's just like lava in the street. But as soon as you're trying to process that, the airport lights are guiding you in, and I want to have this one moment where you just see out kind of across the airport like that, and you just get the sense of like, expansive flatness. Yeah, the camera shake is doing quite a bit. I'm layering a lot of our camera shakeified stuff going on here. And one thing, if you want that kind of vertigo feeling, is, and I actually remember learning this by watching Monsters, Inc. at the end, where they're all on like the doors and they're going around on all of those tracks. And there was one shot where I like, seeing it in the theater, my stomach dropped. I'm like, whoa, here we go. And it's just when the object starts to fall away that you're in before the point of view. And so you get this kind of sense of hang time. And so I tried to kind of do that in this one. It kind of works, but that's what I was going for. This shot, I'm pretty proud of. I rendered it a few times because Cycle's ability to render volumetrics kind of accurately and without noise kept improving, and so every time I re-rendered it, it was able to render cleaner and faster. I would even do, because it's hard, but it doesn't want to render these spotlights here where it's just like you get these fireflies in the mist. So I would render 2 different passes kind of with different seed samples, so the noise would be different. Then I'd like overlay them to try to get that to work. Obviously, the thing I'm kind of trying to distract the eye with is the landing gear here, which is just a lot of different kind of nested IK chains. You can have an IK chain lets you set up a series of bones that connects from one to the other. And if you just move one bone, all the other ones can kind of accordion-wise like kind of solve to that. And you can parent other IK chains in those IK chains. So you have things controlling other things. So that's all this is right here. The hard part was I wanted the wheels to kind of stop when they hit the ground. And let's do a little breakdown here. This will be the overall bone for the entire ship here. I'm going to extrude this out so it kind of forms a little accordion here, and this will be kind of our landing gear. And to make it an IK chain, it needs to be solving to kind of another bone, which is literally just exists to kind of like be a target for these guys. So if I kind of line this up here, you want it to be detached. Go into pose mode, select this one, and shift click on this one and hit Shift I. It sets up that IK constraint, which again, that's the most confusing part of the entire thing. The thing to know about IK constraints is they want to go all the way to the beginning of the parent. And so if we go through and parent this landing gear to the overall ship, which we want to do, Control P, keep offset, you can see now this yellow dotted line goes all the way to this first bone, but we can turn that down here by just turning down the chain length to 2 instead of infinite. And the reason I have the landing gear design like this is because as long as you can figure out how to solve a triangle, IK chains are great at solving triangles. So that's all I'm trying to do. The actual angle I want is right here. Because say we have our landing gear and the axle's kind of right along the end of this, parent this to the bone. Then as the ship lands, the wheel will always kind of just stay at ground level right here, which is cool. So what we want is for this to go down until this wheel hits the ground, and then this bone stops, and only this one can keep going. And if we just parent this bone to this one, that won't happen. So what we need to do is use a buffer bone, and let's see how well this works actually. Yeah, we've still got our ground here. Gonna stick that to under the wheel. Gonna line this up with the ground, and I'm gonna parent this bone to this bone, and this bone back to this one. But on this intermediary bone, we can apply a constraint. If we go into pose mode and go to the bone constraint tab, we can give it a floor constraint, which just lets you say, hey, you can't go any further along this world axis than this object. So if we select the ground here, I think, in fact, we can even move this down like this. So this is the default shape of the landing gear. It'll do whatever we want, but then when it reaches the ground, you know, it'll do that. We got something about the angles of this, and the radius means it's kind of clipping a little bit. But that's the overall idea of that landing gear, and I just duplicate it for the other side, and he had some other IK chains parented to these IK chains, and when you do the final look, it feels like it's doing a whole bunch of stuff, but that's literally all it is. So we're landing on a landing pad, and I like that it's kind of disorienting for a second, because it just means you have to stop and think like, wait, why is this going up? And then you realize like, oh no, we're actually kind of going down. And it just gives the audience something to kind of think about a little bit. This was one of the hardest shots to composite, just because he's standing in front of like this big empty gray space, and like he's all yellow. This is all just kind of like, again, I wasn't doing myself any favors. There's kind of haze, the black levels felt weird, and also there's no light directly affecting him. Like if I'd had some, you know, yellow lights here in the platform shining up at him to tie everything together, it would have been a lot easier. So the end result is I just micromanaged the black levels as he's walking. I'm tweaking things in the saturation. I added these railings and kind of this computer thing to kind of sandwich him in there and be like, look, he's in the scene. I didn't like the computer until, again, just like I did a quick cloth sim and I set the pressure to negative, so it kind of sucked in on itself and it looked like kind of a plastic bag. Then just gave it like a glossy and transparent shader, and yeah, it looks like it's a weatherproofing kind of plastic wrap. I like that. I do have one of a few obvious mistakes. I always meant to fix his little clipped off leg there, but I didn't. Going up the escalator. This is like some kind of lazy modeling. I wish I'd done that a little bit better, but I am really happy with these reflections. Just the scratches and everything, and kind of seeing things moving as it goes. I think that works really good. These are some cameras that I modeled for the Hyperbole. This is one of the few objects that I used from a like an asset pack. This is a big, medium, small, I think like mech library or something, and I was like, yeah, that's a good shape right there. Made a lot of different silly signs. This is, I think, another shot I made here on the Patreon, and I couldn't figure out for the life of me why the lighting wasn't working. I tried for a couple days just tweaking things. I had this bright light overhead, kind of like this centralized thing. I thought that was really good for the composition. 9 months later, I reopen the shot and I look at it and I'm like, oh, we just need to delete these lights and kind of move this like this. And I like the shot like 10 times more, like within 5 minutes. So yeah, always feel free to go back and like play with old stuff. It's hard when you have like a dark thing, you know, a dark space with bright lights, trying to still get like a good composition and sense of space, just because like the bright lights are so compositionally dominant. And so keeping all of them kind of along this one plane here, I think helped quite a bit, and everything else keeping, you know, the 1 point perspective worked well in this case. This is a bonus shot. The edit works just fine without it, but I just thought it was nice for kind of demonstrating time has been going by, and also just like it gave me some fun chance to do the layering of kind of the world building. I like that there was this big old fancy analog clock, but then at some point they tacked up like a little digital clock too, just because like people couldn't read this one, and it's just like tacky. Also the same with like these little North American electrical outlets. I just think that's funny. You have a sci-fi thing with just like North American outlets. That's ridiculous. Although I think this one's obviously floating. Or like you have this carved, granite or marble or whatever with like a drop ceiling, kind of foam tiled type ceiling. It's just ridiculous. I was trying to get as many of those layers in there as possible. All these statues of my friend Lucian, just over and over and over. So many Lucians. And what's cool is these are all just regular photo scans, but then when you scale them down to like, 5% on one axis, it still kind of receives directional light, but it's also very flat. And so you get that kind of statue feeling. This one just had a decimate modifier on it. And so it kind of looks a little bit brutalist, Soviet, kind of chiseled and all that, but that's literally just a decimate modifier. This shot I like. We've got all these little pigeons. There's actually so many pigeons in this shot. It would blow your mind. But yeah, this kind of central, again, it's that bright blue kind of over bright light. I originally had this like a third the brightness, and everything was just kind of in this dim neutral area. But yeah, the moment I was like, no, this is a garish, like, 2 a.m. you walk out of the building, you're waiting for a taxi, and you're just like I think this kind of captures that vibe. I did mess up with the mocap. You'll notice this person and this person both kind of move in perfect sync. Oh, uh-oh. Always meant to fix that. Now we're into the taxi stuff. This is a practical seat. Everything else, and practical Tom. Everything else is digital. I think I'll do a breakdown of one of these shots later. This shot, again, in every shot, I want there to be something kind of new. And in this one, the new thing was, I just like this, try whatever billboard thing. We used to have those around town when I was a kid, where it's like, it's just such a mechanical solution to, we want 3 billboards where there's space for 1 billboard. So it's just made of all these like, 3-sided posts that'll just rotate in tandem to reveal, different billboards. Yeah, I wish I'd been able to get like a close-up or something in there. The highway signs, I basically modeled just 3 different variations, and then I had a Blender file with like all these different symbols and stuff ready to go. So if I ever needed a new sign, I just drag new things in there, type in the name of the off-ramp or whatever, hit render, drop it onto the sign asset, and there we go. Yeah, I use that a ton. I was going to re-render this shot just because the specularity, the shininess on the road, I think is way too much. Like I don't really believe that at all. But that, I didn't think that was enough reason to re-render the whole thing. This is also, there's so many shots in this thing where you can only see like 100 feet. Like this is about as far as you ever see in every shot, and it started to feel just very limiting. And so very intentionally I was trying to put a horizon in this shot just to kind of open things up a little bit. The most ridiculous part of this shot is probably the little Dr. Lemur's ad right here. Like I'd had this thought that if I put on the mocap suit, I could just throw it on some weird stylized photo scans and just make a bad animation very quickly. So yeah, this was all made in like a couple hours. I love these wacky dudes. I'm going to show you how, yeah, and then they're all dancing. Yeah. So these guys right here, if we drag in Scott, there's a modifier called Corrective Smooth. And Nathan showed this to me. It's pretty great. If you're doing a lot of deformations and stuff, it can really be handy for kind of just cleaning things up and getting rid of weird things where like certain joints might inflate or whatever. But it also has this scale thing. So here, we'll turn on the repeat a little bit. And it's doing a smooth operation. So it's just averaging out, all of the different vertices kind of going on there. But it's saving that as an offset. And you can play with that directly by just amplifying it, which means everything that's protruding is protruding more. So you get this kind of immediate caricature. I just love that. Or you can go the other way and undo everything and take everybody to Smoothville, which is also pretty fantastic. And so I just thought, what if movies and shows in the world of Dynamo have these are like the characters that are very popular. Look at this. I love doing I love doing this to everybody. This is so great. Okay. The reason these shots here work, because again, he's real, this bit of seat is real, everything else is digital, is because we had Tom's wife, Amy, was kind of just randomly swinging a light bar over Tom's head as we were going. And I would just make sure a digital light was also passing by at about the same time. Like, it didn't even have to be all that lined up. As long as the light was moving and coincided to like some degree in intensity and color temperature and movement, your brain's like, oh yeah, this all ties together. And that went so far in making everything just kind of gel. Again, I made the light really bright too. Having these very bright things kind of passing through an otherwise dark scene, in my opinion, added so much realism. Yeah. At the end of this shot, his head clips off a little bit. I always think it's funny when people leave the comments kind of pointing out the mistakes. Like, did you know about this? It's like, yeah, I am the Bill Murray of Groundhog's Day of this episode. I've seen every shot 300 times. I probably am aware of everything. It's just sometimes, you know, there's a lot of mistakes I even leave in just as kind of like a bet or like a reminder to myself to kind of not be too much of a perfectionist. But this one is, I do kind of cringe at that one. I'm like, I could have just zoomed in the shot a little bit more in the edit and it would have been totally fine. But look at this. It's a shot with no CG in it. Wow. Oh, we're back. This was one of the first shots where I used a procedural kind of texturing solution for the edges, all of this edge wear. And I'm combining it with some like actual other unwrapping that had like some rust on the corner. And those two working together worked pretty okay. This little readout too, again, it's just, it's an emissive image, but it's underneath some kind of rough glass. And so you kind of feel the reflections in there. For the robot language, I kind of figured like, to be really efficient, I'm kind of thinking like the Matrix too, I think, but I wanted there to be like computery gibberish that would make sense to them, but like not to humans, like not human readable. And so this is just I used a Unicode, which is kind of the world standard font text type thing, and I just had it spit out a bunch of random stuff, and I pasted that in, and I think I just did a screen capture, and I'm offsetting the UVs to line up the different lines from the screen capture of just like random Unicode. But yeah, look at that. Those are just great shapes. I wanna do that more in the future. This shot didn't really work. So the joke was gonna be, you know, these are the statue to the founders, but I haven't actually cast who those people are yet, and so it's like he was just going to be parked behind their butts. And the joke is going to be it's an overpass and the whole rest of the screen is just big gold butts. But no one could tell they were, everybody thought they were teeth or something, like just like enamel or whatever. So I kept having to shrink them away and like, it kills the whole joke, but that's okay. Okay, and let's break down one of the taxi shots. I think I want to do like a full, I might even upload to real YouTube, the first tutorial I've done in, I think, years, kind of talking about this, because it was pretty easy, but it's also like really fun. So I think this is that same take. We just have him sitting on the bench, and this shot's logged off. There isn't even any original camera movement, which is great, because it means all I have to do is project him onto some geometry in the scene. Yeah, this right here, which I kind of have following the shape of the seat. And I can add whatever motion I want to this other camera here, and I can even add like a little bit of parallax. That's why I have the bag here. One, to hide the fact that he doesn't have any legs, and two, to just kind of add a little bit more opportunities for kind of parallax. You can see, like, it falls apart really fast. You can tell he's just kind of a 2D character, but especially if we're just kind of doing rotational stuff, it works pretty darn well. And if I'd filmed everything so like the camera was always locked down right here, what I could have done is just, you know, here's the camera that's projecting the footage, then I add another camera here that, you know, is doing whatever. I could have just literally replaced the video file here and taken care of adding variety of the shots, like, oh, this one's here and like that, all from like this one camera. And that'd be a really efficient way to work, because I wouldn't have to like do the whole motion tracking pipeline on every shot. And like we were talking about earlier, I've got this kind of gradient that controls the brightness of the image. I've got this brighter version of the footage and then this darker version, and that was just to help add some contact shadows. Here, if I scale it down, I can kind of do that, because the edges of the seat in the practical seat were way too bright, and it kind of looked weird, like it felt like there should have been like some contact shadows here. So instead I just kind of added a gradient to the footage itself, and that helped kind of fix that and also keep the focus on his face. So it's really kind of like you're looking at his face and you're looking at the robot, and that's the shot. But yeah, for the shots where it's moving, I'm doing the exact same thing, except this camera would be tracked to match the motion of the shot. So yeah, I'm just yelling, oh, we're going to the left, ah! And there's Amy with the light bar. But yeah, I also tried to get some shots that would be from outside the taxi. So having like a layer of glass, and then Tom, then another layer of glass, and the city kind of just helps sandwich everything really good. And again, the camera shake is doing quite a bit here to kind of, again, this is a locked off shot, but it feels like it's pretty organic, which I'm happy with. All of these exterior shots are animated with AKA Studios RBC kind of GeoNodes plugin. It lets you animate vehicles with like a little Microsoft aircraft controller. And what's cool about it is it's actually using physics. So if like your car goes up on 2 wheels, only those 2 wheels are going to have any effect over like what's going on. And so it just kind of added some fun realism. When I'm setting up the roads, I'll usually set up like a kind of a basic version of the scene first with just really low poly everything. A lot of times I'll subdivide the roads with a little fractal noise just to give the car a little something to kind of bounce off of. And once I have the motion good, I'll go in and I'll build everything else out because otherwise my computer wouldn't be able to keep up, and I would only know what it felt like when I did the final render. Most of these shots, yeah, I'd have an initial kind of blocked out gray rendered version I drop in the timeline just to see how everything felt, and then once I liked that, I would go in and like actually give everything a proper texture. We've got more of these highway signs right here. Look at that. This whole sequence actually changed because of that plugin. Like if you look at this shot, this is obviously just me playing around with the physics and everything, being like, oh, that's kind of fun. We originally filmed the scene with Tom just sitting on like a stool, and I was like, I'll put the taxi around you. But after I started animating the car with the thing, the taxi's driving like crazy, and then it cuts to Tom just kind of sitting there being like, taxi, what's going on? And so yeah, Lex was like, I can build the scene. And so we filmed it again with Tom just holding on, being like, oh, the whole time. And I'm really glad we did, because I think the episode really needed that energy to kind of boost things up. But yeah, all of this is just having fun with that plugin. Here we've got the coat. I modeled these motorcycles. I thought this shot would be cooler compositionally. When I first started it, just this kind of light over the motorcycle in like a black void looked really cool. But once I started adding all this background stuff, it kind of negated the spotlight feeling, and it just kind of like, I don't know, it's fine. But it's just a little bit muddy. I was never able to. What it probably needs is one of those over bright areas, excluding the coat, like something to actually draw the eye. Like if I had some really bright light coming out of this alley, kind of like defining the shot, and like they're sitting in the darkness outside of that, I think that probably would have helped things quite a bit. Yeah, I've got these paper things. There's a few kind of physics solutions that once you have them, like the papers are just a lot of, it's a cloth sim with a lot of planes just stacked together. Like I'll stack all these different planes, and I'll make the collision margin so that it's wide enough that every paper is intersecting with every other paper. So when the simulation starts, all the papers just explode under their own kind of like intersecting pressure. Or here, I'll show you. We're gonna create a plane to be the ground right here under the physics tab. I'm gonna hit collision. We're gonna create our little magazine. So I'm gonna scale that down. I'm just gonna create a lot of different pages of the magazine here. Gonna do all this, bring it up, bring it up, bring it up. And then I'm gonna select everything and scale it down so everything is kind of just compressed real good. And then here, let's subdivide everything maybe twice. I'm gonna make it a cloth object and go down to collisions, check self collisions. If the self collision distance is too broad, then every vertex of the same piece of paper is colliding with itself. So the paper's just like, oh, I'm colliding. And so you wanna kind of dial that in the right way. But if we hit play, look at that. All the papers just kind of do their thing. We turn on auto smooth. It looks like they might be kind of self-colliding. So I might turn down the distance. Maybe also turn down the vertex mass a little bit. Yeah, and the thing that really makes it work is adding some turbulence to the whole thing. Force field, turbulence. I'm going to make the size maybe 0.5, which means every box here kind of has a different weight to it, kind of like this, and that'll affect the paper. Make the strength something really strong, and let's see what this does. Ideally, just kind of, yeah, it makes the papers feel like they're blowing around. Sometimes I'll combine this with like a wind force field, or if you animate the turbulence too, you can kind of give a directionality to it. But this is a great, really fast, lightweight way to add a bunch of life to the back of a scene, especially if like a spaceship's landing or something. I love doing this. And once I have that, I can paste that into basically any shot and have exploding papers, which are great for kind of just feeling chaotic. This shot has some of the best stuff and some of the worst stuff all kind of mixed together. I like those shots where it's like you're using every kind of technique you got, but like the road, I kind of went hard on it. Like I'm doing a lot of things with shaders and, adding stuff, but like when you really look at it, it just kind of looks like a sticker. Like I don't really believe that this is an actual, you can see UV stretching and all of that. Same with like, I've got streets full of people and they're diving out of the way, but they're also like the most CG looking people you've kind of ever seen. And so yeah, it's kind of a balance of that. Also, I'm doing all the mocap, and the only motion I could think of for people diving out of the way of a car is to like hop and pinwheel your arms. And so you see just like kind of 6 people in a row all kind of jumping and spinning their arms. But that said, it is fun to like spend a couple days just modeling a street and, adding all of these neon signs and thinking like, oh, oh, they're getting little hot dogs or kind of whatever, and making glimpses into these shops. The real fun thing is the fact that I know there's going to be so much motion blur, I don't actually have to develop anything more than I want to. Like, this is the most you're ever going to see into this shop, and so I can kind of do some really quick projection stuff, take 2 minutes, and that's it. I've had multiple people say, like, I wish you could pause it without the motion blur so you could see all the details there. It's like, there's no details under the motion blur. Now, I modeled all of it knowing there'd be a bunch of motion blur. We're back into Old Town here. I liked being able to reuse that asset from Salad Mug, and like, hopefully, if you've seen Salad Mug, your brain starts to be like, oh, I've seen this before. We're going back to kind of a known location. But yeah, I like the feeling of kind of that centrifugal, I don't know, that being flung out, you know, as you turn a corner type thing. Worked really good. But I didn't have enough of it, so you'll notice once he kind of slings out a frame, the footage freezes. He just stays there, and we just kind of see his arm there. But I didn't really think people would notice because there's this big wacky face here, which I added literally just because I thought there should be a big wacky face. I wanted like that beat of like people acclimate as they're watching something to kind of the status quo, and so every once in a while you just need to be like, what was that? Type moment. I don't know. I'm kind of bummed. I modeled this whole facade pretty hard, but like when you see it in the final render, it just kind of looks like a bunch of mush. But that's sometimes just what happens. I like all the lights moving in this shot, and again, just how bright some of these lights are as they pass by. I think that really makes it kind of pretty. This shot starts really purple because it was supposed to be transitioning in from like a different shot that I think I deleted that was very purple, and so I'm trying to like kind of end one shot and have it, you know, flow into the next one. I ended up just lining it up with the purple part of the previous shot, and it all kind of works. But yeah, I didn't really know what the edit was going to be. Like, we filmed a bunch of shots of Tom bouncing around, and then I got a bunch of different dialogue bits, and I just kind of kept massaging them for a few months until finally everything kind of like created an order for itself. But yeah, this was actually a pretty tricky edit. A lot of this wasn't actually in the script. This was just kind of like playing around, finding happy accidents, having way too much fun with a little RBC animation thing. There's lots of little spots like right here where I spend a lot of time animating it, being like, oh yeah, you take your smoke break right here, and here's these people, and kind of thinking, what would their lives be? And then you see the final thing, and it's like 12 frames, and I go, oh, okay, well that's fine. But yeah, same with kind of here. You can see I'm doing some lazy stuff with projection mapping and all of that. But that sense of like there's you're looking down into a bright kind of corridor where people are doing things late at night. I think that comes across pretty good. But yeah, a lot of these shots I'll even turn down the motion blur at the end. I'm like, I don't want to hide everything with motion blur, so I'll turn it down to 0.3 or something, which feels a little bit stuttery, but it also doesn't just turn into blur salad. Here's another case where I'm kind of trying to like transition from the neon to kind of other neon to kind of make the edits all flow a little bit. We talked extensively about this shot here on the Patreon. But again, for all the work I put into it, there isn't really anything that makes you go, you know, like the big weird face that makes you go, oh, look at that. Like, I wish I'd done some very specific signage or something for right here that could like kind of attract your eye. Do you kind of know what I mean? Like, I worked hard on this. There's a lot of things in here, but because there's nothing to actually specifically attract the eye, it's just a bunch of kind of stalls and open doors and lights and things. It feels like there isn't anything to actually look at. And I kind of wish I'd gone harder on that. Then we get more into rigid body zones, which is so fun. You just set up a bunch of rigid body boxes and smash into them with another one, which is the first thing we all do when we start playing around with rigid body stuff. Is it's like, oh, we can smash a sphere through a bunch of boxes, and it's fun. It's like, yeah, that's literally all I'm doing. One thing I was doing over and over in these sequences was like, I'd take a box and I'd fill it like with the papers with a bunch of other smaller boxes, and I'd set all of them to deactivated, which means the physics system isn't gonna do anything until another object knocks into it. And so they're just sitting there under tension until the taxi object comes in, at which point all of the objects go, oh, we're intersecting, and they explode. And so that's all I'm doing, is I'm setting up a lot of just different things to explode. You can see the taxi itself isn't like the rigid body object. I have kind of a big wedge, kind of a piece of cheese shape parented to it that's actually interacting with the rigid body, and you can see that wedge kind of right there as it's just kind of like pressing into everything. This shot, again, I was always going to update. There was going to be stuff on this tables. I was going to add all of this signage. It was going to be a little glimpse into this, like, Mr. Wind Chimes life. And I never did any of that. All I did was model the wind chimes. And even then, like, look, they're just floating there. I didn't add any textures, really, or anything. But it goes fast enough that I think that's okay. This is also my most audacious digital double in the entire thing. Like, look at that. It's just a digital guy. This is my friend Mark with like he makes all of his own clothes too. He's great. And so he showed up with a bunch of just different outfits that he'd made, including this one. And he had this big kind of singing bowl. And so he put on his head, and I was like, yeah, it can be like the monks of the sweet vibrations or something. Right here, I filmed all of these candles, and then I would like film it, and I'd blow on it at intervals, and I kind of sorted it all into a sheet so they'd all kind of blow at the same time. And it doesn't really, I thought it'd have a bigger impact on the shot. When you look at it going by, it kind of goes boosh a little bit, but it's also one of those things where, you know, if people had commented, hey, why don't the candles flicker as the taxi drives by? It's like, they do. The other little detail I'm kind of happy with in this one is these curtains overhead are a cloth sim, and I put a force field kind of like behind the car, kind of simulating like the displaced air that chases, you know, when a bus drives by you on the road, like 2 seconds later you feel the air from it. And so yeah, as it goes by, it's knocking into these curtains, and it just feels kind of natural. Everything else is those intersecting boxes and all that again, and just kind of like awkward shelves all stacked together. These little digital people, they work okay. I gave him shiny pants. I think that works pretty cool. This shot was kind of a disappointment at first. I worked really hard on it, and then the final render just didn't feel right. Just compositionally and the people, it felt like weirdly dead. And I was like, look, I filled it with TVs. It's like a bistro full of cyberpunk TVs. This is, I think this should be cool. And he was just fine. But yeah, again, a year later, I came back and kind of just added these dudes here, changing the sign. I think the thing that actually makes the shot work is the guy's coat. When you look at it, it's got just a little bit of like a physics sim on it. And it's done in kind of a lazy way. I duplicated him, deleted everything but the coat shape, like pinned the neck and maybe his back into the cloth sim on it, and it's intersecting with the underlying mesh of him like crazy. But since the textures line up, you can't tell when it's like intersecting. Just sometimes it looks like the coat's popping out, you know. And that's a technique I think I'll do more in the future. Oh yeah, and at the very last second, I pasted in more papers and kind of boxes just from other scenes, just to add this kind of chaos going on here. In fact, Brendan had already started working on the sound at that point, so I had to email him and be like, Brendan, I added more boxes, sorry. But yeah, the composition of kind of just like, I'm trying to nest things, kind of, we're looking out of an area into an area, kind of this weird spiral type thing, with little just nooks to kind of look into. I'm trying to make things kind of feel a little bit layered. I'm also trying to add verticality, like you can see in this shot. Yeah, everything's always either going up or down a little bit, which makes the physics and animation stuff more interesting, because it's not just a car driving around on like a, you know, on a plane. But it also forces, every time I'm modeling anything, it's forcing me to reconcile with the fact that like nothing's necessarily square. If I have a doorway here, I've got to figure out how to stoop works and kind of all of that, and like just how it gives me something to push against. And I think just also makes things kind of visually interesting. Let's see, this shot has this little road that goes up towards the end here. These are, my friends used to be making, back in like high school, my friends were trying to make all these SWAT military movies. They ended up joining the Marines. I think they did very, very good. But yeah, I got all their old like airsoft like tack gear or whatever. And so this is me dressed up like a dork. You can see the underlying photo scan is really blobby, but on top of that, I've hand modeled all these like guns and little gizmos and things. And I think that crispness combined with the blobby scan actually looks kind of okay. I like this back area. It just feels very retro. It kind of has that grimy kind of feeling to it. I made all these signs. Every sign you see here is one I just kind of like took 2 days and made a bunch of specific things, trying to think about, you know, what would actually exist in the world. I don't know if they all make sense to actually be on the same building, but I wanted that, you know, that very vertical kind of Hong Kong-y overhanging stuff here. Boop, more of those papers. This is one of the shots where I think I literally did just replace the footage that was being projected onto the plane, and I kind of like just swapped out some of the background things. But this shot was already basically done, and it came together really fast. I like this one. This is my friends Jesse and Julian. Just kind of, I don't know why this is the street that they're cleaning, because this is obviously not a street that's often cleaned. The continuity of the roads I'm kind of happy with. Like, it starts off, again, everything is very pristine, kind of feeling like a sticker. We've got a very flat road, and by the time we get deep into Old Town, all the roads are kind of like old and aged and layered and falling apart, and I thought that worked kind of cool. Another shot here where we're looking through the window. The whole thing with this one of the nope sign kind of coming in is because we're actually working kind of in real time with ray tracing in the viewport, I was able to animate the car, and then I don't think this sign is actually anywhere that would actually make sense. It's set up this way just so we get the reflection passing kind of in the way we wanted. And yeah, then we cut to the actual reveal there. Some of these edits are hard because we're orbiting the nope sign, and so for flow of motion, are we moving to the right? But if we're tilting to the right, then everything we're seeing is moving to the left. And so it's like, what part actually defines the flow of motion, especially if then you flip the camera 180 degrees? And yeah, dialing in what exactly that was hard. Same with like cutting to this shot. With my first version, it just felt like the camera was suddenly moving in the wrong direction during that cut. And so this also, I think I re-rendered during the last week. Just I added a little like camera whip to the beginning just to kind of make it feel like the stuff is flowing. This shot's fun. I hate these leaves. I should have done something about those leaves. They look like a sticker. There's also a little continuity thing. I added these plastic bags kind of last second too because I was pretty happy with the asset, but I didn't have enough time to re-render everything. So in this shot coming up, look at that. No plastic bags. How embarrassing. We've got the big shot right here, the big point of view shot. First, we've got the reveal of Turd. I don't know why I lit it like this, kind of as if it's like from a flash bulb. I was thinking there's like a bar light over the door of the taxi to kind of illuminate the space outside, and you can see it turn on as the robot comes down. I don't think it's a thing people question, but I just wanted him to feel kind of surreal, kind of David Lynchy as he's entering in. He's like, "Hello, prepare for exit." Like I wanted it to be just a weird moment. I guess I can talk about that in the directing one, but I didn't actually think anybody's nervous during the taxi scene. It's like, oh no, you're not sitting there being like, oh, he's being abducted. I'm so scared about what's happening. And so I wanted the melodramatic reveal to kind of match the state of mind of like where the audience was at a little bit too. But like Tom's still in it. He's existing in his own reality. So he bashes him with a fire extinguisher. Run, 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 run. These types of scenes are always pretty fun. People have said, oh, you used Camera Shakeify for this shot, which is true, but this is actually the shot that inspired Camera Shakeify. Like I was writing the script and then realized like, oh, we don't have to figure out green screen or anything if we're just doing like a full digital shot. So maybe I should lean more on point of views. And yeah, talk to Nathan. I went outside and recorded all of these, just holding the camera or walking or running or, moving around. So all the camera shake you see here, there's a layer of Blender keyframing, but then on top of that, that's actually me holding the motion of me holding a camera, which is kind of cool. And I can blend between the two, like in this scene right here. And yeah, this is another scene where I'm very much relying on the motion blur to kind of sell everything. I like having these little glowing shops and stuff passing by to kind of promise like, oh, you could stop and go in here, but that's not where we're going. Instead, we're going through this random door. I think we modeled these slot machines here on the Patreon. And yeah, as we were going, it's just trying to figure out how do we randomize all the lights so we can copy and paste everything, and it doesn't feel like it's all just the same asset over and over, even though it is. This is one of the few shots where there is a little bit of the AI generated stuff, because this was like a year and a half, 2 years ago, back when everybody was talking about AI. I mean, they still are, but the tone's changed a little bit. And so everybody was like, look, I created a plugin that, lets you do one click to make a scene in Blender. And everybody's being like, you got to learn AI or you're being left behind. And I was like, okay, what is the one place I could kind of imagine this could fit into my workflow? And my thought was background stuff that adds texture but isn't things you're actually supposed to see is kind of a place I thought would be okay. So yeah, I put those up there. But the one thing the past couple of years have kind of forced us all to address in our heads is like, why is it worth it to make anything? And I kind of like the meta experience of watching this episode being like, wow, Ian worked pretty hard on this, because I did work pretty hard on this. And having little AI things in the background kind of kneecaps that whole experience. And so I guess I wish I'd re-rendered this shot just to have those there so there wasn't a thing you could point at and be like, look, who cares? He just used AI or whatever. I think I did design most of these pinball machines to actually have some kind of fun stuff going on, but you never really see any of them but the Hyperbowl too. I live on the Kitsap Peninsula where there's like an inordinate number of people who play pinball and like pinball tournaments and all of that. So like a lot of different cafes and bars will have just a pinball room, and I love to go back there and just see. It's just so dense. And it's weird to see like which movies got their own pinball machine, like ones from the 80s, but also ones from like a couple of years ago. It's very bizarre. I love it. We keep running. Most of this is just garbage and kind of different things that I've scanned over the years. Some of these I got from Sketchfab, or like I bought, and now we're back at the robot. He falls. This is just on the green screen stage, so I kind of like put some gunk behind him. His hair goes transparent. I wish I'd fixed that, but I didn't. And then we've got this, the reveal. The light, to get the light to cast on him, I'm literally just standing like right behind him with a LED panel, and I just swipe it across him. Then I try to time the door to kind of like also sync up. Again, it doesn't really work. Like, you can see the light on him goes faster, but as long as the movement's kind of all matching up in general, like it's weirdly forgiving. Other than that, the composite is not great. Like, I think he jitters and is kind of sliding, but that's okay. I like this crane. I reused this crane asset during this opening bit here, just the exact same model. These wires hanging here are also from the big, medium, small asset pack, and yeah, I think they work really good. I don't know why I don't use more assets. They're a great way to save time. You can see in this case, I copied and pasted these pipes from the salad mug episode, which now they do look very 2019 for me. Like, why? They're just blobs, but that's okay. Now I've got this shot. A lot of stuff to say about this shot. Let's see. This is, again, one of those shots I kind of redid in the last week before. It's another one where there isn't, like, it's just kind of flat, ambiguous lighting on him. I tried to give directional stuff through, like, this elevator thing right here, but it still just kind of ended up being this amorphous thing. And so this was very hard to figure out, too. I'm doing a lot of stuff trying to, like, darken up certain areas. His legs just it was really hard to get them to fit. In fact, part of what I did with the re-render is I animated some kind of shadow geometry. You can see I've just kind of got these feet shape, go away timeline, that just kind of terminate right there at like his knee, but like I just wanted that for that really direct contact shadow. And I'll just turn on auto keyframing and kind of animate them step by step. It usually takes like 5 minutes. The shot works really good once he gets under this light, which again is just matching the location of a real LED bar that I had on a tripod on the day. I've talked about it a lot in the past, but my green screen stage is like a literal stage, and there's a couple steps to get up there, so I'll just drape some of the green screen on the front of those steps. I think it kind of helps for, like, you get the sense of when he's walking around, okay, I get it, he's walking around just on a flat green screen, and when he kind of is able to descend into something, I think that adds a certain level of dimensionality to it that's good. But yeah, just this blown out area right here, that contrast, I really like that. I want to remember to kind of do that more in the future. These are all just like the same couple businessmen. I think this is me and Lux kind of having a little argument. And because it's just something I could link in, I have like these two guys arguing in the background of a lot of different shots. Like, that's them right there. That's them again. That's probably them, probably. Yeah, a couple guys in suits make good background filler. The funnest part of the shot to me is obviously this little bag handoff. See, I have kind of a handoff frame where I'm transitioning from the digital bag to the footage, and I'm literally just using a Boolean to cut the bag out of the footage until he reaches over to grab it. It's just like a Boolean cube. It's just really lazy masking. And to make the digital bag, I just took basically the handoff frame of the bag as a still image and projected from the camera's view onto some really low-res geometry so that it would kind of, I could do a little bit of a perspective thing on it. But if you look close, it doesn't even really, like, the handle's all wonky and all that, but it works okay. I think this background is literally the matte painting from Salad Mug. This next shot, yeah, it's good. It's good. I like how long it is. Obviously, these little blowing plastic things kind of steal the shot a little bit. I'm really glad. That's like, I think it's just a glass shader, or it's just a mix of, like, you know, translucent and all of that. They're set up to be with a cloth sim. And the detail that, you know, I'm pretty proud of is just whenever it goes in between the big spaces and the little spaces, you can see like the atmospheric, the pressure shift kind of blows all the plastic in for a second. It's like when you drive into a tunnel in a car, your car suddenly filling up that space in the tunnel increases the air pressure. I don't know if that's actually what the physics would do in that situation, but to do it, all I had to do was set up a force field in the middle of the cart and just turn up like the negative pressure for a frame or the positive pressure for a frame, and all the plastic kind of goes boosh. And for the rest of the physics, I think I just use turbulence force fields quite a bit to kind of like create pressure systems in the in the world. In general, the shot kind of suffers from what I was talking about before, where this isn't really designed. It's just a bunch of greebles kind of all put on top of each other, and like the aesthetics right and the textures right, so it's okay, but like I wish I'd actually kind of sketched out some actual shapes. I think most good designs can have a mix of like big bold parts combined with like, you know, the small little supplementary parts, and this is only small. It's all the greebles, and if you look, like his feet aren't even on the ground, they're just floating there. Like that's kind of embarrassing. But the overall thing of like this 1 point perspective, we're on a mission, we're going, they're talking right here, and the lighting is, you know, showing that they're important. I think the shot works in that regard. Getting off the trolley here, this shot was tricky only because of the way the lighting is. I had to kind of animate a full digital Tom just to cast all the shadows and integration and everything. Otherwise, he felt kind of floaty. But after that, it worked. It worked okay. And this is when I was first really leaning into that kind of grime and plastic pack I just released with like these textures. I just like this. You could never model this. Like you maybe could, but like it would take forever. And here it's just a picture, and it just adds so much. Like, oh, that's like insulation foam underneath like a panel that's come off, or maybe some sort of like vapor barrier to keep certain parts clean. The idea that everything has layers inside of it, like this right here, the panels come off and you can see some sort of conduits or kind of something like that. I'm using more of the little pine needles here. I've got little pieces of trash kind of wedged up there in the pipe, but at the same time I still have this very low poly, like extrude, inset kind of stuff going on over here. Or like I have all of this nice worn texture kind of going on here, but then for these inset bits, it's literally just extruded down. It's perfectly crisp 90-degree angles. They don't really match like the visual language of the texture that's on top of it, which is kind of overthinking stuff, but it's just that question of like looking at something and being like, do I actually believe, does this have a believable tangibility? Even if it's not like photorealistic, do I believe that it exists in the nature of the space, I guess. This shot, I very much lean into kind of sticking garbage everywhere. In fact, this is the shot where when I'm working on an asset pack or whatever, I'll usually let myself overuse it on a shot. So all these little pieces of garbage, I mean, just the bits of plastic kind of between. This is a really low poly type of thing here, but like just adding the plastic as if it's like got stuck in there added so much to me. So yeah, really, really letting myself lean into that. The thing I kind of liked camera-wise, like, the camera floats here. This is kind of an awkward, like, ideally you know how the camera would be recording the thing. Is this a drone shot? Is this somebody walking? Are we filming out of a car window? And in this case, it's like, I don't know, we're on like a separate elevator or something. But when the elevator starts, I kind of add this little ka-chunk kind of movement to the camera, as if maybe we're sitting down on a crane that's about to kind of like start going up. Let's see, can you even feel it? Yeah, as if it's like, okay, here we go. We've done the camera handoff or whatever. And of course, I love making all these little kind of nooks and stuff. Like here's his guy, this guy sitting back in the alley, these guys all, you know, hanging out of the cymatic temple. I messed up. He's rubbing the inside of the singing bowl instead of the outside. I'm sorry to anybody who noticed that and was frustrated. But yeah, when working on a shot like this, I'll just take one day and be like, this is my project of this day, and then the next day I'll be like, this is my project. And if it's too big, sometimes I don't finish. I'll wrap it up the next day. In this case, I thought I'd finished, but then I made another project of just animating Luca and Julian playing like their little cube game here. Most of the people you see aren't really animated. They're just totally static. And as long as like one person in the conversation is talking, I think that kind of sells it. One of the most useful photo scans I think I've ever gotten was just of my living room on kind of a messy day. I think it was after a party, so there was blankets and stuff scattered everywhere. So I just got a little fast, sloppy, low poly LiDAR scan, and I've used those things everywhere because it comes with all of the life and everything kind of baked in. So all of these chairs and kind of like there's tables and stuff inside of there. I think this chair is part of that scan too. Yeah, this is my coffee table. I just want to go to my friends' houses and be like, can I scan your messy bedroom? The shirts, that was the clothesline asset from a while ago where I just filmed a bunch of my actual shirts and pants on a green screen, blew them with a fan, and set them up with the geometry nodes kind of system. Anything you can hang through a space to kind of help break it up and create like foreground and background and all of that, I think does a lot too. In the background here, we've got kind of that same sprawl asset going again, and this is the level that's so fun to model at because it's only the fun bits. I get to kind of just stick, pre-made buildings in there, and here I think I got more clothesline. If I want, I can add little signs and all of that, but like the details don't feel like they're missing if they are missing, so it's only the gravy of like, hey, yeah, I get to just add stuff. The two things I don't like about the shot. One, this is actually has probably the most important exposition of the entire episode, and people should actually kind of hear what's being said, and instead I filled the background with as many distracting things as possible, which was not a good directorial decision. And two, just like, I've got all these different lighting scenarios going by in the background, and he's just kind of lit statically with these lights from right here, which feels like it's just a little bit too much picture in a picture. It feels like he's not really connected to the rest of the scene, but I think maybe also that's kind of okay. Oh, one detail I kind of liked. I've got these rails coming in from the subway here that kind of go into the this elevator area. And as it moves up, those rails kind of go with it. And I was thinking, it's for moving heavy stuff up to the top of the wall. So you'd have some sort of, winch type thing that's on the rails, and you can put it there. And when we get to the top, it lines up with those rails right there, so we can kind of go either way. I don't know, I thought that was kind of a fun little detail. It's fun to see how this kind of unfolds, but I don't actually know why that makes any sort of efficient engineering sense. But yeah, here we are here. This is more green screen stuff, obviously. I'm doing the thing I do in basically every shot where I just stick an LED bar over his head. We need to have a CG light source affecting both like the real person and the CG stuff kind of in the same way. I think that does a lot to integrate it. So a lot of times I'm trying to come up with some very direct way to have the lighting affecting him. Like being able to walk in and out of kind of these pools of light and not being afraid to let things get a little bit too dark for a second. The complex here, like I know my next couple episodes are going to be very complex centric, and so I'm going to be building all of these assets and kind of different techniques and tools for generating that. So I know whatever it looks like here won't really match what it'll look like in the subsequent episodes once I've really gone hard on designing the environment. So like letting it be a little bit hidden in shadow was very much on purpose, along with kind of making it look just kind of eerie and big. One thing I think is cool is all these little shimmering lights kind of going on in the city. Those are all real. Yeah, here we go. We were cresting over the hill coming into Yakima in eastern Washington on like a hot night. And just all of that heat distortion was making all of these lights on the opposite hill kind of shimmer. And so that's the thing I'll do a lot on an otherwise static matte painting, is just add a little bit of shimmery kind of stuff going on. Or like, adding flying birds or animated bits of steam. The classic stuff. Or having, shadows of clouds moving across the background, like right here. Having the moon come out from behind the clouds is really easy. I'll just kind of have up some plane. Sometimes I'll even turn off the visibility to the camera here, so it's just the shadow, like that. And then I created a noise texture, and I put that into the alpha here, and put that through a color ramp to kind of crisp it up a little bit. Maybe turn up the detail, scale it up, and if I animate it moving across, we've just got this nice kind of cloud pattern. In fact, I can scale it up really big. Put in a volumetric shader here, and you get these nice kind of cool sun rays going across too. Here, let's make it even a little bit denser. Yeah, if you imagine we're looking across like a big field or kind of something like that, the open tundra, that's a fun look. Next, we get to the outside of the complex here. These are again just kind of kit bashed from a bunch of different tractor parts. This background is just a bunch of cement textures projected onto cubes. Got my little birds here again. This alcove here is entirely practical, and I like stuff like this because again, I don't have to key or roto or anything. I just project this footage onto kind of this block and fill in all the digital other stuff. Got to figure out why my MP4s don't have thumbnails anymore. Okay, yeah, this was the original shot here, and I basically just was standing there. I stabilized the shot in Resolve, and was just able to project it onto the geometry. So they get onto their boat. You can see I'm doing my little shimmering light kind of thing here in the background too. These birds are from Salad Mug. It's just I use shape keys to animate all these bird shapes, and then I'm using voids to kind of have them try to get an attractor object in the middle there. I think I've made a lot of videos about that in the past too. The wake worked surprisingly well. It turns out wakes are kind of a static deformation. Like as long as the boat is moving at the same speed, the shape of the wake isn't changing relative to the boat. So I use dynamic paint to kind of like simulate a wake. And then I was able to export like a height map of that, which I just parented to the back of the boat. But what's really making it work is I got some drone footage of chasing like a motorboat from the top, and I was able to use Illumamat to extract just that video texture, and I'm applying that on top of that displacement. And especially like these little waves and stuff here, that's all the texture doing everything. Yeah, I was really happy with that. What I want to do is take a boat out onto the thing and get a bunch of like custom video textures of wakes because I have a lot of water stuff coming up. And if I do that, that would be a fun asset to share here. I always felt like there was a better way to grade this shot. Like I'd play around, I got a lot of different looks, and I never really felt like I totally got it. But that's okay. I wanted that early morning feeling, and this kind of just feels ambiguous. This shot I was always going to make fully digital. I had this whole plan of like they were going to be getting off the boats and kind of doing all this stuff and like an initial kind of like going through a door type thing, and this was just the placeholder. But then I found myself never really being upset when it came on screen, and so I thought, okay, well, let's just save myself a few days. Let things be practical. It did kind of bug me. There's a lot of like graffiti that's been painted over in this sequence, and in theory nobody really comes out here. It's this very forbidden zone, and so especially as they get deeper, the fact there's still kind of old graffiti type stuff in the background doesn't make much sense, but that's okay. This shot here, this whole scene, we filmed this scene, and then I was convinced that it wasn't going to work. Just cinematically, I thought I was filming really bad stuff, and so I made everybody refilm it again in a different location, and I ended up just using the exact first stuff we filmed. There's probably a lesson in that for me, but I don't know what it is. Anyways, thank you to all of my friends for letting me be like that sometimes. These are more just kind of little scans. I kind of came up with the rusty shader. You can see right here. I'm just kind of sticking it on stuff and trying to blend different things together. I wanted to feel like old infrastructure that was somehow still kind of working. And so adding this very mechanical kind of chunk type thing going on, I think sold that okay. This was probably the hardest composite of the entire shot. The haze coming out of this overblown area was really intense, and that's why like his face looks a little bit weird. I'm doing a lot of dehazing and trying to extract stuff from just this weird, flat, washed out thing, and the fact that it looks as good as it does is pretty surprising, frankly. But yeah, this somebody released a video on Nathan's Compify thing, which I have to go leave a comment on it because people keep being like, it's Ian's Compify thing. I'm like, I just posted it here on the Patreon. Like Nathan was the mastermind guy, but yeah, people keep commenting like, well, Ian like delights all of his shots. I'm like, this is the only shot really that I use that on, I think, in the entire episode. And that's because I couldn't figure out how to do it any other way. Like, look at this, just the integration really is cool. And also I'm using the magic masks, so they're kind of floating on their own plane in the right place in 3D space. So as his head gets close, you can see it's actually kind of casting a shadow. I don't know, this was a lot of like tweaking on a frame by frame basis. I like that his backpack kind of bumps in that thing right there. It just, even though it actually is just bashing into real stuff, it feels like it's integrating with the CG stuff too. It's just, I don't know. This also has another big mistake in it, and that Andy was standing right here with the shotgun mic, and I only kind of painted him out. Like you can see, there's the tip of the shotgun mic. I just figured everybody would be looking at the door opening and no one would really be looking at the patch over here. Now we get into the land of more audacious digital doubles. Adding these little dangling straps right here added so much. Like, just this secondary motion sells things so good. But yeah, all of these are just me with a Rococo suit animating stuff. Scale-wise, I'm being pretty inconsistent. Like in real life, Quasi is really tall, and I think a lot of times I kind of have them the same size in the scenes. Obviously, keeping all the doubles small goes a long way for like not letting people see how fake they look. But I think it also works for the scene of like they're entering into this very large kind of space, and you're just seeing them small, and it kind of makes the scene feel a little bit more epic. Because I do tend to kind of do everything with medium shots in general. This was a nice reminder of like, no, have different scales going on. I like this shot. I wanted that feeling of like just walking into like, oh, there's nothing. What is this? It's just a void. Like, what's that word for that? Like fear of the ocean or whatever. I kind of wanted that. You just have no sense how far things go. Yeah, this is more stuff we filmed at the fort. I liked this hallway. I like just the roughness and the specularity and like how rich and textured all of these different materials are. If you look at this shot here, there's a tiny little doorway, and if you go in that doorway and take a right, these stairs were right there. It's a really fun place to just explore those old forts because there's so much weird underground stuff. And Tom turns on the jacket. Once he turned on the jacket, things worked a lot better too, because the walk cycles, if you're actually looking at their feet, they're a little weird. I haven't quite figured out walk cycles yet. Like, I have a lot of rebar in the concrete of the floor of the workshop, and whenever I'm doing the Rococo stuff, it uses, I think, like accelerometers and electromagnetic fields to work, and so I think they interact with the rebar a little bit. I've had a lot better luck when I do things out on the lawn or like, you know, on somewhere with a wood floor. But once we added all the lights to his coat here, just that texture like hid a lot of crimes. I also think it's kind of fun to just have the characters themselves be the light source, like just really letting everything else be black, and they're just a little pool of light that's moving through. It lets you get away with quite a bit. This shot was, yeah, all digital, but it blended really well with this crack. And this crack is actually an air gap that completely like circumnavigates this central, this is like a command headquarters. And so yeah, for whatever reason, they just built an air gap in. You can crawl up on top of this too, and there's just complete separation. I think in case of a bomb or something like that, or maybe just for sound. I have no idea. Then we get to seeing the killer robot. Oh, this is the other shot I used Compify on, just kind of to get some of this integration here. We got an HDRI here, reprojected it back onto like just this interior cube shape. I animated a little point light to match his light here, so you get just a little bit of shadow drift. But other than that, yeah, these are just more tractor parts and kind of some pictures of tarps stuck over the whole thing. Then we're walking. This stuff just didn't have enough light, really. I'm doing as much as I can with kind of sharpening things up. And if you look, you can kind of just feel that sharpening going on here in areas where it does have enough contrast to work with stuff. I don't know. I'm not particularly mad at it, but I'm just bringing it up because there's no CG right now, you know? He walks down a hallway. I bought a Tom wig so that I would, you know, look like Tom, and I would dress up in his costume. And Lux and I went out and we filmed a bunch of new stuff at the fort. But in general, it turns out just I don't have Tom's body type at all. It looked like I just had this very skinny neck and like this big weird wig, and like the coat didn't. I don't know how he makes that coat look as good as he does, because when I wear it, it just looks like there's this bad cloth sim on top of me, and I look like a kid, like trying to dress like a weird cyber dad. So yeah, this is the only shot of me wearing the coat in the whole thing. Then we go to full digital double here. Again, these little lights and lens flares really hide a lot of crimes. I have a video talking about that. So all of these lens flares are, again, just on a plane, and are parented to the different things. And I have it so that they're only visible when they're oriented in line with the camera view. Like when the camera's point of view is perpendicular to that face, then you see the lens flare, which means you're automatically getting flares as the lights are pointing at the camera, which just adds a really nice kind of automatic texture to everything. Yeah, that's something I think I'm going to do quite a bit more in the future. So he runs off, and now he's reading the map right here. This is one of those happy accidents of like just realizing, oh wait, he can actually just shine the light through the map, and I like it because like Lux built this cool jacket and also designed this map with the different layers here, and so just everything you see was designed specifically to be in the shot. Then he hears the noise and. He walks into the room. I wasn't sure how well this little sequence would come across. This is one where, like, at the end of the day, we'd done our shoot day. Everything was taking longer than expected. And then in the very last, like, half hour, it's like, Tom, let's go. And we just kind of ran through, the two of us, through all of these places. And we got a bunch. We filmed this whole scene. We got the following scene. Actually, basically everything you see from now until the end of the thing, we filmed over the course of like the last 20 minutes of the day, just blasting it out. And it's always kind of frustrating. Like sometimes I'll start a shoot knowing that type of energy is possible, but we're doing it kind of like the slow, proper way for like 95% of the day. I'm like, what? How do we make that final 5% kind of fill more of the day? But I think it's just panic. You have to be kind of in a like, we don't care about that. We'll fix that later. And everybody goes, no, let's do it right. And it's like, okay, and then things go real slow. This is one of the shots where like the little bits of graffiti and stuff really bug me, because in theory he's in some weird trippy room deep in the complex, and it's like who's tagging in there? That doesn't make any sense. Kind of modeled this. It's a little bit low poly and stuff. These are just random other bits, but I think it works okay. Little digital Tom there. Then he goes through the door. It's hard to find good old doors like this in the Seattle area because it's a very young city, and also everything old has been torn down and turned into like condominiums or whatever. You very rarely find this cool kind of plaster type look, which is where I film at the old World War I and World War II forts a little bit too much, just because they have this cool weathering and feeling of age on them. I'd love to travel places that actually have proper old buildings, but until then, we'll probably see this type of location a little bit more. He rounds the corner here. Again, we filmed this entire sequence in like a couple minutes. This is a whole roto job by Zeke Faust. He was just originally looking at, I don't know, a wall or something, and Zeke traced the whole thing out and tracked the shot. And then I added kind of my digital zoom on it. So I'm doing two things here. One, I'm zooming in, but also I have the entire environment parented to an empty, which I'm just scaling down. And so you get that kind of like weird foreshortening vertigo zoom effect, but it's literally happening on like a physical transform level too. I wanted to introduce the idea of warping space while also making it feel like things could just be like lens artifacts or whatever. I wanted to make it feel very kind of in-grounded and as like in camera as possible. And I think it worked okay. Yeah, then we cut back to Tom, and then we cut back to the hallway here. And I'm just doing a digital zoom with the blender camera. I think we get up to like a 2,000 millimeter lens. I think this is like in blender space, like 3 miles away or something like that. We're looking down this hallway, which is so fun that you can do that. The shimmer here is just a plane with a refractive material on it, and I think I'm putting just a noise texture into the normal map or the index of refraction or something, so it's undulating just a little bit and just dialing that in. I had no idea what it would look like until I did the final render, and yeah, it feels like you're looking through water or just a lot of air distortion. This right here, this creepy shape, that is Caitlin. We filmed that for the salad mug episode. Originally, we are going to see her crawling out of the train car onto the stop, but I decided not to use that. And I was going to have her come over so we can actually film some of this stuff properly, but I was like, oh, let's see if some of this old footage works. And it actually does. It looks kind of creepy. And then the stick monster, which I think I also did a video about fairly recently in the rigid body video. Because yeah, these are all rigid body sticks. Rigid bodies calculate pretty darn fast. Like there's thousands of sticks here, and we got a few kind of weird anomalous ones, and there's definitely like some jitter in a lot of the stick solutions, which is where the sound design kind of has this rattlesnake sound to it to make it feel like maybe it's on purpose, you know? Because yeah, every stick you see is a rigid body object here. And then I just animated with Rococo suit me getting up off of the floor, and I parented some mesh to it. I don't know, it's some random digital double that I made invisible to the camera, but you can set up a mesh to be a force field that interacts with the rigid body stuff. So I just made it to be some sort of attractor object, but by doing that and slowly turning up the attraction over time, more and more sticks. I think you can increase the radius of the effect too. So I'm turning up the radius and the strength, and so as it goes, more and more sticks are being attracted to the mesh. That's what feels cool to me, is how much this reads as a human type movement. It feels very alive just because of the underlying motion. He's got his big weird head, which people have said make him look kind of like a toddler. Like, it does look like he's kind of just crawling around. He is a baby, but I think he looks creepy, especially with those weird owl eyes. Yeah. Then we're zipping down the hallway. This shows how far apart each one of these, all of these purple rings you saw here. These are all just lights in the middle of the hallway, like lighting up these couple 100-foot sections of the hallway. But once you get that much focal compression, it just looks like it's these narrow bands here. So once I actually zoom the camera out, you can see that the gap between all of these is really big, which I thought was kind of fun. Again, just trying to augment space a little bit. The burning house shot, I was surprised how many people said this was like one of their favorite shots. It came together really easily. The wood here, we were just burning a pallet, like a shipping pallet in the fire pit in the backyard. So I just took those pieces out and scanned each individual one, and I had these kind of burnt wooden things that I used as big beams. These are actually just really tiny little pieces. And on top of that, I refilmed some embers once. I think it's an asset that I shared a couple of years ago, different like sparks and fire bits here, like all of that, and I just cube projected them on top of those burnt beams using like a noise texture to control where they appear or not. And yeah, it felt weirdly alive. I like it. This whole grass sequence was, again, part of that last 20-minute frantic filming rush. We just found there was this circle of, this is where a giant like cannon used to be to defend Puget Sound during like one of the wars, and it's been filled with grass, so we ran with it. And again, just projecting this footage onto some low poly geometry here. I think it's kind of fun because the patio itself extends out pretty far, like in all directions. But I can only project it onto like these little areas here, and suddenly it looks like, you know, I can completely change the feeling of the space. I should have gone harder on this grass right here. It's definitely just exactly what it looks like, little pictures of grass stuck in there, but that's okay. This shot, Zeke Faust rotoscoped and tracked because he is a beast. I sent it to him being like, hey, are there any like kind of clever ways you might be able to auto mask Tom out? And he disappeared for like, I don't know, 2 days and came back. And it turns out he just rotoscoped the whole thing by hand. What a guy. Yeah, let's see. Let me dig out the original shot. Yeah, here we go. And so yeah, we're just on top of like one of the weird batteries or something. And he walks into the distance, and we tilt up to see these beautiful trees. So thank you, Zeke. So that's the episode. Probably the last time I'll be going this hard on green screen for a hefty minute. We'll see. I'm filming some stuff with Josh Truex that I want to be, you know, it's going to have some fun sci-fi stuff in there. But in general, we're moving on to the boat episode, which is going to be a lot more about extending practical locations and kind of mixing and matching, which I'm pretty excited about. Maybe using Compify a little bit more. Yeah. thanks for hanging out. I want to make the directing one too coming up pretty quick here, and yeah, this video was weirdly hard to make. I thought it'd be really easy because I just get to like talk about what I did, but it wasn't. So I'm excited to make just a regular one of like, hey, this is how we get textures to play nice. Anyways, all right, I'll let you go. I'm gonna go eat a sandwich.